Good morning. Good morning. I can't see you, but I hope you can see us. Thank you for being here. So we've been talking a lot over the past day about an energy revolution underway in the US. Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about another energy revolution, one on the other side of the world. And we're going to go and talk about an energy revolution that in many ways makes the one that we've been talking about for the past 24 hours here seem pretty small. We're going to go take a tour of the energy landscape in China. Who has been to China? Okay, and who's been to China in the last year? Excellent, okay. So just a couple of facts and just to get us on the same page. China's the world's most populous country with 4 times as many people as the United States. It's the world's largest energy consumer. It's the world's biggest carbon dioxide emitter. And all those trends are expected to increase over the next years and couple of decades. The US talks about an all-of-the-above energy strategy. China is implementing one. As we're going to talk about over the next hour, China is pursuing basically every energy source that you can think of. Coal, oil, gas, nuclear, renewables, and an energy source that many people don't often think of as an energy source, which is energy efficiency, how to use energy less wastefully. That pursuit has profound implications both domestically for China and geopolitically for the world. For one thing, it's sparking fights. Fights inside China between huge established energy interests and smaller upstarts, and fights between China and other countries, notably the United States. At the same time, it's creating strange and interesting new bedfellows, something that often isn't discussed as much as the fights. These emerging alliances are fascinating and they're really important, and many of them are playing out between energy companies in China and the United States, which we're going to talk about here. So there are 2 basic premises of this panel. Number 1, China is the most important player in the global energy game, full stop. More important than any other country, including the United States. Number 2, China's swath of the global energy landscape is a lot more complicated and nuanced than the common caricatures of it, which are both good and bad caricatures, would have you believe. Our goal here is to explore that swath with 3 very qualified tour guides, each of them coming from different backgrounds. Each of them is smart, each of them is well connected in China, and most importantly to me, each of them is a straight talker, so they will not beat around the bush. And they all have experience on the ground in China. So let me introduce them, and then I'll tell you how we're going to carry out the next 55 minutes or so. First, we have Jiang Lin. Jiang Lin is Senior Vice President of the Energy Foundation. Many of you may know the Energy Foundation, but it is a San Francisco-based philanthropy, essentially, that takes money from quite large foundations and then delivers that money, parses that money out in the form of grants having to do with a kind of cleaner way of energy production and consumption, doing a lot of that work in the United States, but quite a lot of that work in China as well. The Energy Foundation has a very large Beijing office, and as you will hear over the next hour, Jiang himself and his staff have been personally very closely involved in the development of some of the most important energy and environmental laws in China over the last 10 or so years. To Jiang's left is Cynthia Wang. Cynthia is Managing Director at China International Capital Corporation, which is a major Chinese investment bank. It was founded in 1995 as a joint venture between several Chinese financial institutions and Morgan Stanley. Cynthia is responsible for CIC's largest clients in the energy business, including some of the largest coal, oil, gas, renewable energy companies in China, and she also does banking with US and European companies trying to do business in China. Cynthia attended college initially at Tsinghua University in Beijing and finished her degree at UC Santa Barbara. She got her MBA and master's from Carnegie Mellon in Pennsylvania and worked for a time on Wall Street in New York before returning to China, where she now works at CICC. I've been derelict. I didn't talk about Jiang's extensive educational background, so let me give you that too. Jiang went to Xi'an Jiaotong University in China and then got his PhD at UC Berkeley, worked at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory for a number of years, particularly on China issues, before going to the Energy Foundation. And then to Cynthia's left, we have Mark Zoback. Mark, as you heard yesterday, is a professor of geophysics at Stanford. You got a sense yesterday of Mark's expertise in the intricacies of how to develop natural gas safely. Mark is also quite involved in that question in China. And that's what we're going to dig into with Mark today. So I know I'm talking a lot. I'm going to talk for a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to sit down and we're going to dig in here. Here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes here showing you some slides. Alan Murray talked yesterday about the perils of having been a journalist and having a resistance to PowerPoint. But I had never put a PowerPoint together before I got to Stanford, so you'll have to forgive the rudimentary nature of this stuff, but I too try. I'm going to show you a couple of slides, a kind of China Energy 101, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we're going to dig into a discussion here, and then we're going to open this up for questions. And I really hope that you will ask impolite and serious and probing questions. I hope that China is on your mind. If it's not, it ought to be. And so let's dig in. All right, so let me just go here really, really quick. How do I do? Okay. Well, I don't know how do I go back? Here we go. All right, so many of you have been to China. This is Shanghai. This is one of the reasons we're standing here today. I took this picture looking out my hotel room about a year and a half ago. Some of that haze is probably the glass of my hotel room, but not most of it. Most of that haze is what's outside the glass in my hotel room. And if you've been reading the news, you know that the haze has gotten an awful lot worse. The smog has gotten an awful lot worse. We're going to talk about that, but that's sort of on a normal day in Shanghai. This was a picture I took in Beijing. Again, and people will back me up on this. I think face masks have become something of a fashion symbol in China. You can buy face masks that are striped, that are plaid, that have polka dots on them, that have cartoon characters. They're ubiquitous, and it's obviously not a laughing matter, right? People wear this because of what they're breathing. And the dirty air is not because the person on the right is smoking a cigarette. Okay, now, real quick, slides, and we're going to do this fast, so just stay with me. You're going to see that there's a trend here, and we're going to do this in about no more than 5 minutes. Okay, these are all slides from the International Energy Agency, which is a sort of repository of something of conventional wisdom on the global energy picture. This is carbon dioxide emissions from energy production around the world, and what do you see? Look at China in green at the bottom, look at the United States in yellow. What you see is, very quickly, that the projections are that carbon dioxide emissions are going to narrow from the developed countries, the United States, Europe, and others, and they're going to rise quite massively in China and in India. And so at the end of the day, the growth, virtually all the growth in carbon dioxide emissions, the experts tell us, around the world is going to come from China and India and the rest of the developing world, not the United States, not Europe. So this is where sort of the central issue lies. Okay. Energy, same picture. This is energy demand in 2035. Just don't look at the numbers, look at the size of the circles. There's the United States, green. Look at the size of the Chinese circle, twice the size of the United States circle. So China is projected to account for 31% of the growth in global energy demand over the next roughly 25 years. The United States, 1%. Okay? Quickly. Coal. We're just going to go into a couple of fuels, and then we're going to stop. King coal. So look at growth in coal consumption. Again, the same picture. The United States, coal consumption actually narrows slightly. The European Union, it narrows. Look at China and look at India. If you want to deal with coal, where in the world do you go? Gas, 2 slides on gas. We're going to talk a lot about it here, and we talked a lot about it yesterday. This is gas demand. So the yellow bar is essentially today, and the blue bar is essentially 25 years from now. So you see an increase in gas demand in the United States. Look at the increase in gas demand in China, third from the bottom. Look at China's gas consumption today, and look at the distance. Look at what's expected to be in the future. So if you want to know where natural gas development is expected to be going, it's largely China. It's, of course, also the Middle East. And I would just look at the size of the blue line. Look at the distance in China of the blue line from where it is today till 2035. And look, essentially the growth in China far outpaces the growth in the United States, in Europe, in Russia combined. Okay, this is gas production, a similar story. Look at China's gas production today. Look at so the gold bar is what's going to happen between now and 2035. That's essentially, in addition to Russia, the 2 largest places in the world where gas production is expected to increase. Okay, a couple more slides quickly. This is transmission, electricity transmission. So this tells you why people who are in the business of building wires and the equipment that goes with electric wires want to be in China. So the solid lines are today, and the hashed lines are 20 or 25 years from now. Look where the growth is happening. Look where the big hashed lines are. It's not in the United States. It's in China. Slurp, my title, not the IEA's. This is oil consumption. Look at the change in oil demand. This is even a more striking slide than the others. Look what's projected to happen to oil demand in in the OECD, the developed countries, the Japan, the United States, and the European Union. It's expected actually to decline. And look at what's happened, look where the growth in oil in demand in the world is going to be, China and India. Okay, you get the idea, right? This is just the same version over and over again. Nuclear energy, this is a bit tough to understand, but effectively the IEA is projecting no growth in nuclear energy production in the United States, in the OECD, in the United States, in Europe. Look where if you want to build nuclear power plants, where should you be? You should be in China. Okay. Green, now this is the second to last slide. This is renewable energy. I know there's quite a lot of interest in renewable energy here, so we're going to just do this real quickly. Just look at the size of the bars. So the ones on the right are 2035. Look at the United States, and look at China. The bars are much bigger in China, right? And then interestingly, look at the breakdown of the 2035 bar in China. And so what do you see? You see a quite sizable increase in wind production and a quite sizable increase in solar production. Still very small as a percentage of the total pie, but if you're in that business, that's big money. Lastly, solar. So we happen to be doing quite a lot of work at the center at Stanford, where I am, analyzing China and solar, because it's a fascinating kind of microcosm of broader geopolitics around energy. And I just want you to look at China and look at the United States again. So this is solar capacity, installed solar capacity effectively today, in 8 years, and in 20 years. And so everyone in the United States talks about a kind of solar revolution going on here, which is dwarfed by what's expected to happen in China. Okay, so we're done with the slides. How do I guess someone will turn these off. And I want to jump in with you guys. So the first question I guess I have is, Cynthia, I have a sense that places around the world that have made big energy shifts, and they have made big energy shifts, have tended to make those shifts largely in response to a crisis. It's not a kind of an esoteric thought about the environment. It's something palpable that hits people immediately. So we saw the slide of Shanghai, downtown Shanghai. So you're the one person on this panel who lives in Beijing and is raising a family in Beijing. Give us a sense of what it's like every day.
Okay. Well, you heard from Jeff that my bio is kind of a mixture of US and China. And so I know how it's like to live in California, and my parents are still there, and I go back every year, and what it's like to be in Beijing right now. The pictures actually don't do justice to what you actually experience in Beijing. Their air is very bad, and it's a huge concern for everyone in town. What we do to counter that, and of course long-term, one is we hope there's a solution. Two, of course, a lot of us are actually thinking about leaving the town, but hopefully that's not going to be the actual end result. What we do is we use purifiers in almost every room.
Air purifiers.
Air purifiers to screen out the particles. When you go outdoors, there's masks. We buy one that's recommended by the Stanford Hospital, which is a VOC mask. And for schools, the international schools that can afford it will have the air bubbles. So everything they used to do outdoors will be moved to within the bubbles. So somehow that.
So literally there are bubbles over buildings.
Bubbles over fields, like football fields, so that you can still exercise. The buildings themselves are sealed, and you have purifiers.
It's like playing tennis indoors, but doing everything athletically indoors, basically.
Yes.
Right. Uh-huh.
Yes, you're creating something like a space station. That's very unfortunate, but that is a form of crisis that you would probably categorize as a catalyst that drives a shift in the energy supply and demand dynamics.
So yeah, I just want everyone here to have that in mind. Think of living in a place where people are installing bubbles over fields to keep out dirty air so that you can go about your daily life. I don't want to be hyperbolic about this, but I also want us to appreciate the gravity of what's going on as we talk about some of the kind of more nuanced economic issues and policy issues. So now let's go into some of the policy issues. Jiang, I want you to, if you can, talk about this dichotomy that I think exists in the sort of public narrative, at least in the United States, about China. On the one hand, there's discussion that China is a kind of acquisitive pursuer of every energy source on the planet, out to corner all the markets, and has no regard whatsoever for the environment, either at home in China or in a climate sense for the planet. And on the other side, there's a narrative that China is actually adopting quite progressive environmental policies, and in fact, China is moving ahead of the United States in sort of leapfrog technologies that will allow China to develop in a much cleaner way than the US did. So what's the truth?
Well, I like to tell this in a tale of two Chinas. I think you have two elements which have both truth to it. And the China story is both a growth story, number one, because in the last 30 years, China's economy has expanded tremendously, average 10% a year growth for 30 years. That growth is driving huge increase in energy demand emissions. And the second is really the story in transition. It's true, China is the largest emitter of CO2s. At the same time, it is also true China is the largest clean tech producer in the world. And the number you showed just now illustrates those contrasts, right? Today, after 5-6 years very rapid growth and investment by both the Chinese entrepreneurs and the government, China today is both the largest producer of solar and wind turbines, but also the market for it. So I think what you're seeing actually is China in transition. A China from one that's dependent on coal, pursuing a very intensive growth strategy, to one that's looking for a new wave of growth, cleaner source of energy, and a smarter quality growth pattern.
And what's the motive? Is the motive for a push toward cleaner energy sources a sense that China simply has a voracious energy appetite and needs everything it can get? Is the motive dirty air? Is the motive climate change? Is the motive a desire to kind of move ahead technologically in terms of the global race over energy technology? What's driving all this?
I think the bottom line is driven by self-national interest, right? There's an environmental concern, which are extremely severe. There's energy security concern, is very challenging, and China imports, 60% of oil now overseas. And then there's an economic concern about what are the next growth driver in a new energy economy. And I think people in China, at least in a very senior level of government, which we work with, have a very long horizon in thinking about what is the next growth driver for China. Right? So I think energy technology and clean tech technology have been considered as a new industry, a new industrial revolution that China need to catch on. And I think in China, there's this belief that China missed the first industrial revolution, missed the second industrial revolution. Now it has to catch on or lead the third industrial revolution, which is really driven by clean technology, clean energy technology, and the IT technology.
So we're gonna get in a few minutes to the pretty serious, nasty fights geopolitically that is creating. But before we do that, Mark, can you weigh in on gas? And here's what I'd like you to talk about. Jim Brown from Halliburton yesterday showed this really interesting slide of shale gas resources around the world. And it was these kind of circles, and the China circle was the biggest circle on the map, right? So that's I guess the conventional wisdom that China has a lot of the stuff. And I guess the question is China actually going to produce a lot of this stuff? And if it's not, why? What are the challenges?
Well, there's no question that China has tremendous potential to produce these shale gas resources, and the need for those resources is clear. Whether it's pollution, net energy, moving away from coal and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So they need the resource, and they have the resource. Now, resource development in North America, there are roughly 20,000 wells, I believe, this year that will be drilled and multi-stage hydraulically fractured in order to produce shale gas and tight oil from unconventional reservoirs.
20,000.
20,000 in just a year. To date, in China, we discussed it earlier, in 2012 there were 12 wells that had been drilled, and now there are probably about 100. So we know very little about the resource, and there are various rumors that come out of China that the Chinese shales are deeper and perhaps less easy to produce. These reports don't bother me at all. If you go to any of the regions around North America where shale gas or tight oil are being produced, there are geologic challenges in every one of those places. And ultimately, geologists and engineers figure out what to do to make that resource available. And I think that is going to happen in China as well, and it's just a matter of time. Now, you asked about the impediments. I think there are a lot of impediments. first you need infrastructure, and that infrastructure is being developed, but you can't drill a gas well unless you can take the gas to market. Second is, you've got to be able to produce the gas at a price where it can compete with coal. Just because you have the gas and it's a better fuel than coal, it has to be able to compete economically. And that's why, LNG will continue to be a source.
LNG, liquid natural gas.
Sorry.
Right.
Well, imports will be a source of gas for coal, a source of gas for China, but you're not going to replace coal with a much more expensive fuel, except, in limited circumstances. So China has to, figure out how to turn this endeavor on, and the national oil companies of China are both the mechanism and partially the impediment. They're not profit-driven. They are committed to carry out their 20-year plan, which basically is focused on other resources. And they don't know very much about unconventional resources. So they're partnering with international oil companies and service companies, and that's good. But the rate of development has been very slow. I think it will pick up over time due to a lot of factors. Once infrastructure is in place, smaller companies can engage. Right now, the smaller companies can't play in that market because unless they can take their gas to market quickly, they can't afford to be drilling wells. But I think the long-term view is very positive. I think over the next 20 years, domestic natural gas production from unconventional reservoirs is going to be a very big part of the equation in China. The real question is, whether we're going to have to wait 20 years or we can accelerate the rate of development. But the bottom line for me is someone who's been pursuing both shale gas development and environmental protection associated with that development is the only thing scarier than China not developing its shale gas is China developing its shale gas resources in an environmentally irresponsible way. And so we're right at the beginning, and we have an opportunity to do it, and we just have to make sure that it's done right.
Talk for a quick second about the geological differences between the shale gas resource in China and the resource in the US, and to the extent that it's tougher to get at, how important that is.
Well, I don't think we know, quite frankly. 100 wells in any one of the basins in North America would just start to kind of give us an idea of what's going on there. And there's 100 wells through all of China. And when you consider the size of the resource, we simply don't know. Okay. And what's happened in North America is the initial success of developing shale gas resources were in the Barnett Shale and the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then the operational procedures that are used there are then tried out in some new area. But then they're adapted. They're adapted because the geology is different and they require adaptation to work effectively. And so it's just a period of learning and evolving the technology to match the geological challenges that has to be engaged. And until that's really engaged, we're not going to know what the ultimate resource is. But I can tell you that in North America, every time we make an assessment of shale gas resources, a year or two later, they're even bigger. The more we look, the more we find. And we know very little in China right now, and I think we just have to withhold judgment until more is known.
So you, Mark, you mentioned a minute ago this issue, which I think is really important for us all to talk about here, which is the structure of the energy industry in China, and the extent to which the structure of the energy industry shapes what is and isn't done on the ground in China with regard to energy and the environment. And Jiang, I'd like you and Cynthia, you as well, to weigh in on this in slightly different ways. So Jiang and I skied a little bit together yesterday, and he's a really good skier. But on the way up on the lift, we had what to me was a fascinating discussion about essentially this battle royal that's playing out on the ground in China right now among energy interests. And I just want Jiang to talk a little bit about that. What's happening as we speak between potential winners and losers in a kind of shakeup?
So one of the stereotypes about China is, China is monolithic. Government decides, and thing gets done. And it can be further from the truth. In many ways, it's exactly the same as here. The story I told about air quality, there's a crisis situation in air quality. People try to, okay, can we burn gas, which is clean? And guess who make a strong proposal about gas? It's the coal industry, when proposed to make gas out of coal. And that sets you backward. And
So explain why that's a bad thing. Why, in your view, taking coal and making gas is
you
bad?
can take a very dirty source, you lose a lot of conversion efficiency, and then you burn the gas. You don't get any of the environmental benefit, in fact. But you do see it, the coal industry is protecting its interest. And electricity sector as well. It's supposed to be a monopoly industry, it's supposed to be strongly regulated. However, the regulator has a very little power over the regulated. It's true a tail, sort of the tail wag the dog. And when the government separated the power industry with the government functions, all the basic research analysis capacity went with the state grid.
State Grid is the largest transmission company. It's effectively the largest utility in the world.
With a billion customers, right? And then you have a regulator who have maybe between themselves, 200 staff in total, looking over the entire sector in China.
This is effectively China's EPA.
No, this is the NEA.
The NEA, the National Energy Administration. Right.
So the regulator really don't have the right information to actually regulate the industry. And there's many cases like this, in the oil industry the same way. We've been talking about air quality. One of the key barriers for improving air quality is poor fuel quality, right?
Is what quality?
Pure fuel quality. The gas
quality.
And diesel are very dirty with very high sulfur content that prevent you take the technology that's available today to clean up the exhaust. And refiners has been resistant to change for many, many years. We've been in that fight for 7, 8 years, try to help them to clean up the fuel. Only in the last year or so, with various highest level of intervention, we're able to break the sort of deadlock on that issue. So it shows that the industry actually holds tremendous power right now in China. And yet to be seen is a new administration, there are clear signals they want to change this rule. But how deep and how fast this will be done is yet to be determined.
It sounds very, very American. Right?
Very much so.
I mean, seriously, right? The outlines of the fight are very, very similar. So it's just interesting to keep in mind. So Cynthia, you have this fascinating vantage point where your clients include some of the largest energy companies that we've been talking about here. And really interestingly, to me at least, a lot of these energy companies are making quite sizable investments around the world, including in the United States. I'll just say one of the things that's been really interesting to me, I lived in Texas for 7 years writing for the Journal about oil and energy and moved to California 2 years ago. And it's been fascinating to see the extent to which Chinese investment is coming into Silicon Valley, investing in effectively energy technology companies that for lots of reasons have not been able to get capital within the United States. And so I want to dig into this issue of trans-Pacific investment. And I guess I have a couple of questions, but the first one is just talk to us about motives here. To the extent that Chinese companies are investing in the United States, energy companies, why are they doing it? Do they want stuff in the ground? Do they want coal and oil and gas? Do they want a financial hedge in a market they see as less financially risky? Do they want technology know-how to bring back to China? What's driving it?
Well, the drivers are actually multifaceted, and you basically touch base on all of the key drivers, and there's a few more I can just point it out. Obviously, China needs resources. We're very hungry for any kind of resource, and that's been the early stage driver for a lot of the transactions, starting from probably 10 years ago. That didn't go that well, especially in developed markets.
In industrialized
countries like the US or Australia.
And why didn't it go well?
Mostly because the model they adapted before was to take over the assets and then trying to send their labor offshore and then to develop and operate the assets by themselves. Obviously, that's not easy to do in countries like the US with quite different legal systems, labor systems. So that didn't go well. And that there's a lot of local resistance and fear for China taking away the jobs and the resources.
So just as a mark, oil company called CNOOC, the acronym is CNOOC, tried to acquire Unocal. And that became a massively politically divisive issue in the US, and in fact, that deal did not go through. So this is sort of, 2005. Right, not that long ago, but kind of an example of the difficulty you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And then the management of these large Chinese companies got smart, or they realized the issues and then they got good advice from bankers like us.
Subtle
to,
plug. Yeah, right.
to really look at it from a portfolio perspective. So when they come here to acquire equity, it actually is easier to accomplish. They would know to form partnerships with the local companies who know the market well and who can operate. And then, or to have a minority stake in large operations here, especially if the company is listed. For example, Sinopec formed a JV with Devon, and that was very successful.
So just to, again, forgive me, but just to define terms here. So Sinopec is one of the largest oil companies in China. Devon is a producer of oil and gas in the United States. And take it away, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of good examples of successful transactions. And the motives behind those transactions were not directly having offtake agreements from these companies, so they're not really buying any resource from the US, but having financial control of or participation in some of these operations. They get economic gains. They're not that exposed to commodity price volatilities. And they're learning from these established companies about technology, about know-how, and about how a mature market should operate. And that goes back to China to make the market more developed.
So we're gonna sort of dig in and talk in detail about one deal or a couple of deals, okay? We've talked a little bit about Sinopec here, which I think is just fascinating in many respects, but Cynthia has had sort of an inside seat at a lot of these deals. So talk about two Sinopec deals, one the deal with Chesapeake, and then talk about the current, we'll move into talking about something called the Texas Clean Energy Project, which is unfolding before our eyes and is just quite interesting for all sorts of reasons. But talk about, so Sinopec is led by a gentleman, Chairman Fu, who was the head of CNOOC at the time that CNOOC tried to do the Unocal deal and failed. And now Mr. Fu is head of Sinopec, and Sinopec did this quite interesting deal with Chesapeake. And just explain the structure of that deal, because your bank was involved.
Well, bankers are not very vocal publicly, so I'll tell you what you can find in public sources anyways. Sinopec actually invested in Chesapeake when there was a financial need from the company.
From Chesapeake.
From Chesapeake. It was great timing. Sinopec has always been interested in unconventional properties and trying to learn more about it. Obviously, it holds a lot of unexploited lots in China, so it makes sense for them to really learn from the Americans. Anyways.
That is, Sinopec owns these unexploited lots, so it can get, to the extent it can get American know-how on how to develop those lots,
Exactly.
That's a good thing, right?
Yes. So that's one driver, and of course having some ownership in a large US company that has a portfolio of different kinds of assets would help. So that was a sort of minority interest, less than 50%. And it was purely an equity level transaction. There's probably some agreements on technology transfer or training programs, but that was it. It was rather a clean-cut, innocent type of transaction, more from the financial investor perspective.
So just to be very simple and clear about it, Sinopec didn't do this deal so it could take Chesapeake's gas from the United States and stick it on a ship and bring it back to China. Sinopec did this deal for reasons having to do with financial hedges and with learning about how one develops gas, obviously lessons that it could apply in China.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Of course, China wants to buy gas from the US, and based on David's analysis, it's good for the US, so hopefully that's going to happen. But that is not the reason why Sinopec invested in China.
So let's talk about the deal between Sinopec and a company called Summit, a US company called Summit, by whom Cynthia's bank and Cynthia were hired as advisors. So in this deal, Cynthia, who sits in Beijing, is representing the American company, not the Chinese company. And there's a project going on around San Antonio, Texas, a quite large plant being built, and really interesting technologically, and also really interesting in terms of deal structure between China and the US. So can you talk to us about that?
Briefly. It's still ongoing, so there's no conclusion to the deal yet. But basically, the plant is a coal to syngas conversion plant. That's the gasification island. And then
synthetic gas.
Synthetic gas, yeah. Right. And from the syngas, they will produce power and also make fertilizer. So there's two products. And then the power will be used by the city of San Antonio and the fertilizer will be sold locally. And then there's another step that captures the carbon and uses it to inject into the oil fields for enhanced oil recovery. And I heard, I haven't been to the site, that there's a very established pipeline for CO2, so the market is very good. So overall, the economics from the project will come from multiple sources for the power, the utility contract, the fertilizer, the CO2, and on top of that, the DOE is very supportive. I heard from Summit, and also I heard from the DOE repeatedly that it is the biggest renewable or clean coal project in the US.
So to be clear, DOE has given money to this project, a quite sizable chunk of money to this project. So this is a project in which, just interesting, right? DOE is putting in money, and Chinese investors are also putting in significant money. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just help set a context for this project? I think the technology issue is really interesting, right? This is a so-called clean coal technology. We know there are a lot of coal in the world, and we know China has a huge coal fleet. And we can talk about all the exciting news about renewables and nuclear, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we still need to deal with the emission from coal plants. And the clean coal technology is a way to address that. So this is a major technology solution to our future emission problem. And second, this also offers an interesting way of how we can look at how US and China can work together in the future. This is an area where China has a technology lead on the capture technology. The US has a lead in terms of experience in injection and capture storage in the oil field. And there's a sort of a beautiful partnership waiting to happen that can marry the advantage of both countries and finding a place to make it work. If it can make it work, then this is actually a huge, huge milestone in finding a major solution to reduce our emissions.
So that's fascinating. So we've been sitting here, and what this group is painting is a collectively quite rosy picture, that the relationship between the US and China is wonderful, and everyone's working together for the good of their bottom lines and the planet. So let me try to ask this artfully. Without perhaps talking about specific deals to the extent you can't talk about specific deals, what are the challenges, a polite word, that a Chinese company faces or that the companies have faced in trying to do these investments in the US? When the rubber hits the road and the deals are actually about to be done or being done, what are the problems?
I think the order will not be really in the order of importance. I'll just tell you what I understand. One challenge was that there's a huge lack of knowledge about the legal system or the tax credit system.
The tax credit system in the United States, which is a big portion of the financing of these deals.
Let's talk about it from a financial investor's perspective. A lot of the clean energy projects in the US actually earn a lot of returns from the tax credits. And then there's a lot of environmental issues you have to be aware of, a lot of labor issues that you have to address throughout the process. And there hasn't been any major Chinese operation in the US. In either construction or operations of these plants. So there's a lack of knowledge, hence a fear for unknown risks.
A fear on the part of the Chinese investor for the risks in the United States.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. So therefore, obviously, when you don't know something, you put a huge discount on everything. So the return that's probably in the mid-20s for the US investors would end up feel like something in the early teens or low teens or mid-teens.
In terms of rate of return.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one factor on the return side. Another factor is fear or bad experience with the US, especially the local partners, for lack of communications or lack of understanding, so that some Chinese companies or the management of the Chinese companies might not be comfortable with. For example, I shouldn't name names, but a very senior guy in one of the largest oil companies in China that's doing a lot of business, hoping to do more business in the US, he said, maybe I shouldn't do projects that are too high profile here, because I don't want to be attacked by the public media. Or it's going to be scrutinized by CFIUS.
So the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., CFIUS, which is a committee that has to pass judgment on large potential deals of, among other things, Chinese investment, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Another interesting fact was that we all think that Chinese companies are heavily subsidized by the government because they get cheap financing from Chinese banks. That's not always true, and that's not always good for projects when they do investment in the US. One is Chinese banks know even less about the US than Chinese companies. So they would actually have a deeper discount, and they would require collateral or guarantee from the parent company. And that's not healthy for a project finance deal. So that's one financing factor. And of course, a lot of the Chinese companies are heavily leveraged already.
That is, they have lots of debt.
They have lots of debt. They are doing almost all the financing based on the credit of the parent company. So in order to expand, in order to have the projects going forward to be a more sustainable operation, it makes sense to have a segregation of the parent company and the project. And that is very difficult for the Chinese.
Because that's not a structure that's been done a lot before in China.
Right, and I would guess the US banks wouldn't like to work with a Chinese company to do projects in the US if they have never done that before.
So go ahead, Jiang, you want to jump
I think
in?
it's the same kind of evaluation by US Bank as well. And those deals are not financed in US for the same reason with technology and familiarity with partners, et cetera.
So I want to shift, and in a couple of minutes we're going to open this up, but I want to talk about something that's been kind of obliquely flecked out here, which is innovation and the relationship between China and the US and innovation. And Mark, I want to start with you on this. I think that the narrative generally is that the United States comes up with whiz-bang technology, Silicon Valley comes up with a lot of it, and China makes stuff cheaply. And China takes bright ideas from the United States and Europe and turns them into saleable products. I think there are a lot of people who think that's changing, and opinions differ on the extent to which that's changing. But what I wonder is, with regard to natural gas, given the interaction you've had on the ground in China with researchers and government officials, what's your sense of who's innovating here? Is there what you would regard as innovation in gas or in any other technology that you regard as relevant in energy that's going on in China?
Well, they've just started a major R&D effort in just the last few weeks, actually, excuse me, for universities and others to sort of help initiate domestic research to help develop the resource as these things come together. Right now, it looks to me like shale gas development is going to start to be significant around 2020. And the reason,
in China?
In China. And the reason for that is the Chinese, sorry, excuse me, let me.
Mountain air.
The Chinese companies who have been investing in North American operations will have 5 years of experience under their belts. They're going to be very familiar with the technology that's used to develop
the
these
Sinopecs
resources.
of the world.
The Sinopecs of this world. Also, the infrastructure will develop. Also, we're going to know a lot more about the resource than we do now. Compare tens of thousands of wells to 100 wells, and not knowing, which areas are going to be most productive. There will be a sorting out of the relationship between the national oil companies of China and the international oil companies. Right now, the work really is being done by the international oil companies, but unless they feel like they'll have access to some of the better properties and be able to actually implement what they learn, what is their interest in staying in China and continuing to partner with China? So all of these things are going to take some time, and as well as developing an independent domestic oil and gas industry, which is now legally possible, for unconventionals. And that industry is going to need private investment. They're going to need infrastructure. They're going to have ready partners in some of the utilities and the people who are actually buying the leases for their own needs for energy. And so it's all going to come together in kind of the details are unpredictable, but we can see the major elements, and it's going to probably take about 5 years for all that to happen. But I don't see the innovation coming so much from the Chinese companies working in China. I think in China, it's going to come from the international oil companies who are working there, but they're going to pull back unless they feel like they really have an opportunity to participate over a longer term. And the innovation is what's being done in North America and elsewhere in the world that the Chinese are participating in and will learn from.
So you have a quite well-known lab at Stanford. Are your PhD students interested in going to China once they graduate and doing research there?
I have a number of Chinese students, and they're absolutely wonderful. They're very bright, they're very hardworking, they have very open minds, and they're as good as students who come to us from anywhere in the world, and we get great students. I think so far the Chinese students have taken jobs in the United States after getting a PhD and sort of learning about what's going on. I think a number of them are thinking about that as a step in their careers, and they will be returning to China at some point. But I think in each and every case, it's going to be an individual decision, and it's really hard to know whether this current generation of students are going to be, the vanguard of sort of this new industry in China or not.
So I want to we're going to, 2 more minutes and we're going to open this up. I want to just finish this question of innovation up with you guys. We haven't talked a lot about renewable energy here, but I want to close with talking about that. And I want to talk in fact about real tensions in renewable energy, particularly solar energy between China and the US. So as I think Jiang was the one who mentioned, China has gone from essentially nowhere in the global solar industry to becoming the world's largest producer of solar panels, and in fact is predicted this year to be the world's largest deployer of solar panels. That is the world's largest producer of solar energy. That's sparking huge tension between China and the United States. There's effectively a trade war going on right now between the two countries over this. In Silicon Valley, it's very interesting. A number of companies have been, sort of young solar energy technology companies have been bought up by Chinese investors, which is a fabulous thing or an awful thing depending on where you sit on this issue, and people sit on both places. So what I wonder is, what does that say to you about the nature of innovation between China and the US in these sort of, in let's say renewable energy technologies? Where is it happening? Is the innovation still happening in the US and getting bought up perhaps by China, or is innovation actually happening on the ground in China?
Well, I think that people have generally a pretty narrow definition for innovation, right? It's always considered some kind of pie-in-the-sky idea. To truly scale technology, you need to innovate across the supply chain, right? So I think China has done a fabulous job in reducing all the waste and the cost in the production process, right? The cost of solar is a major impediment to its deployment. So if you can innovate across the production process to take it down by the scale 1 to 4, right? And as we've seen the last 4 or 5 years, that's a tremendous innovation.
Massive price decline in solar panels.
And people clearly underappreciate that kind of innovation. And second, there's still very healthy innovation in the US in the technology front. What's, I think, interesting is how this is being pitched in the media, right? The kind of competition we're talking about. Is that really real competition? People actually in China are very mystified by the US concern over the solar trade, because the greatest value in the solar chain is not in making solar panel, which is probably only a quarter to 30% in value. The rest is in design, installation, and financing the solar. And most importantly, who benefit from the solar innovation in the long run, in the end, is the consumer, right? So you and I, as a buyer of a solar panel put on your top of your roof, you are taking a tremendous benefit right now from the cost destruction that's occurring in the industry.
Largely as a result of Chinese manufacturing, right?
So that's scaling up. Of course, there's other help too. I mean, in Europe, there's very strong market promotion programs. I think that's driven the innovation as well. So I think we are also misunderstanding this industry is global in nature. No one sort of owns this industry or one particular technology. There's so many pieces, people are cross-licensing, they're helping each other. So you see a final product maybe from one company, but in between there are many, many steps to get there. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how this industry is evolving over time. You might have heard of the case of Goldman, right? The wind
Chinese
turbine
wind turbine company
developer, which was a very small before, now is one of the largest in China. They have developed a very interesting global research platform, both in the US and Europe, and they're really harnessing all the latest technology and then put them into one package.
So we're going to stop here. I think we could go on for another half an hour, and at least I'd be interested. But Rob Gardner from Exxon talked to us yesterday about Exxon's view of the global energy picture. And Exxon has a quite interesting view of China and a fairly nuanced view of China's growth and how it's going to play out over the next decade or two. So Rob, can you just stand up, and then we're going to do some more questions and sort of react to what you've heard today and how you guys see China's energy consumption and production.
Sure, Jeff, thanks. Is this on yet?
Yeah.
So, looking at China, we all think China is just continuing to grow in energy demand, and it is the world's most largest population center. But there are things happening in China that we have to remember that is shaping it. Overall, right now, China has about 74% of its population in the workforce. And that's going to trend down over the next 3 decades. And that's an important transition that will affect the Chinese demand profile and also workforce and how the economy shifts. Overall, we think growth will slow in China. We think all of the energy demand growth will actually happen by about 2025 and then start to plateau.
In China.
In China. And so really, what happens is China is about 20% of the global energy mix by the end of the outlook, but it won't grow anymore because the other countries are growing more, as you mentioned India when you showed those charts. So you couple that with a slowing economy, a shifting workforce, a different energy profile. At the same time, their income per capita, GDP per capita, is rising. And so they have more, they can afford more. Electricity demand is going to double, more than double on a per capita basis. So electricity becomes more important, particularly when you talk about what fuels. China is using an all-of-the-above energy strategy. Coal is their, right now, largest energy supply source, but we believe that will start to peak and come down after 2025, 2030. So I think a lot of the comments you're hearing are about China beginning a transition and looking at how they can do it, and I think that's an important revelation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Secretary Schultz, can I put you on the spot? If I can't, I'm going to try anyway. Here's what I wondered. You've seen a lot of energy cycles, and you've seen, obviously, a lot geopolitically in terms of the relationship among countries on energy. And I just wonder if you can kind of take us up to 30,000 feet for a second, and how do you see the relationship between China and the US on energy against the backdrop of relationships between the US and other countries on energy over the past number of years, the past 30 or 40 years?
I don't know really how it is, but based on my experience from years ago, I know how it should be. And here's what you should do. I remember when I was in office, I sat down with Deng Xiaoping and Wu Chi-chen, who was my counterpart. And we said, okay, you put on the table everything you want to talk about. I'll put on the table everything I want to talk about. Let's make that into an agenda. And let's have an organized way of working our way through that agenda. Now, I think in the energy arena, we should do something like that. Because, as is pointed out, China is the biggest emitter, the United States is the biggest emitter per capita. There are lots of ideas being produced, there are lots of applications going on. My impression is that in the United States there is more innovation, more research and development and so on. But a lot of it, as I look at Stanford, and some of these scientists come and tell me some miraculous things they're doing, they're all Chinese. But they migrated here a long time ago, and now they're American citizens, but that's their background. So I think that there's a tremendous amount taking place. This meeting has been focused a lot on oil and gas and shale and whatnot. And I keep trying to remind people there is a lot of R&D going on, and solar panels are less cheap, are more inexpensive, and that's continuing. Batteries are getting better. I might say in the Exxon presentation, I was surprised that you don't have any line for electric cars and transportation electricity. I think you're wrong about that, from all that I can see. By looking at batteries are the name of the game. And they seem to be getting better very fast. At any rate, it seems to me what China and the US should do in a very serious way is to have this, you put on the table, we'll put on the table. Let's get an agreement on intellectual property, because one of the reasons a lot of people don't go to China is they think they're going to steal it from you. So let's get that straightened out, clear, and then work our way through carefully. And it can be done. You take the shale business, at least as I understand it, Mark, in the United States for a long time, people said, well, there's a lot of shale, but you can't do anything about it because it's this, that, or the other thing. And then there was a lot more, there was a lot of federal money went in, a lot of R&D money went in, and some entrepreneurial characters came along, and they're the ones who figured it out. So don't expect the large oil companies to figure this out. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But look into the nature of the differences and get some entrepreneurial people to come. And if they make a killing, wonderful. They figured out, don't get mad if somebody makes a big buck. It's good if they do something that's worth it. But at any rate, I think there is room for an organized, collaborative way of going about things that not only shares ideas, but shares practical ways. And as I said yesterday, I think the name of the game is doing something. Never mind about what we're going to be like in 2050, pie in the sky. What are you going to do today that's going to make it better? That's the name of the game.
Thanks very much. Let me ask, I'm going to ask one other person. Actually, you know what? Why don't you, who wants to ask a question? Raise your hand. Hi, because it's hard to see you guys from here. Sorry? Oh yeah, I see a couple here, so sure, the gentleman in the dark blazer there, why don't you just stand up and shout? Thanks.
Okay. Building on what Secretary Schultz just said, and what he said earlier at the conference, that these focused bilateral agreement or focused agreements work, like Montreal. If there were some specific opportunities between the U.S. and China to have a focused, targeted bilateral agreement for clean energy, what would you recommend as those focus areas?
So there obviously have been a whole series of at least multilateral discussions between China and the U.S. and this whole notion that increasingly China and the U.S. are as the big dogs at the table, ought to be the only dogs at the table. But you guys someone want to jump in on this?
Well, I don't know how many dogs you can hold on the one table. But I think I do want to emphasize and echo what Secretary Schultz said about what you can do today, right? We can't wait for some magical solution shows up 2015 in Paris. And there are a lot of things we can do today. We know that's happening both in the US and in China. For example, in the building sector, we know we have technology today to take building to be zero emission. This is done in many places in the US. It's being tried now in different places in China. And that is really a game changer in terms of thinking about future energy consumptions. You know, in the U.S., building sector is about 40% energy use. If you can transform that sector to be zero, that's a totally different ballgame.
So this is really unsexy stuff, right? This is building buildings in a way that they don't necessarily look green, but they just act greener, right? I mean, they use less energy.
Really green, both greener and outside and greener in the core, and also looking beautiful at the same time. It shouldn't, you shouldn't take any of those sort of feature away.
But in a policy sense, this is a result of really sort of roll up your sleeves, detailed work, not kind of grand carbon negotiations.
This is a lot of work that the Department of Energy is doing in the U.S. in its building codes, zero building initiatives. There's many ways that we can promote that at a faster pace. There's a lot of technology that's available that need to be integrated together. There's a lot of design solution we have not really shared widely with people in terms of passive solar design, for example, using nature as your energy source instead of providing sort of mechanical energy all the time. And there's many ways you can do that. And there are a lot of people who now are experimenting with those interesting solutions. I think the challenge now is for the government on both sides to think about how do you take that knowledge and solution and scale them in a nationwide program.
So we've got about 2 minutes, and I want to try to get 2 questions or something in here. I want to pick on Dave Danielson from the DOE. So Dave is here from the Department of Energy, and a number of people talked about the Department of Energy. And Dave, do you want to just weigh in at all and sort of how you see the relationship with China, or a question that you've got for the panel or anything?
I think an interesting question I'd love to pose to the panel is this idea of how do we find win-win opportunities? right? Because a number of folks see the clean energy revolution as a great opportunity to reinvigorate U.S. manufacturing, where we have intrinsic competitive advantage. But it's also in everyone's global interest to see China rapidly adopt low carbon technologies. And so I'm wondering if you see some seams or opportunities for win-wins where the department, the China and U.S. can work together collaboratively in areas whereas they may want to compete in other areas.
Did everyone hear that question? Raise your hand if you didn't. The question is basically, what are specific areas where China and the U.S. can cooperate? And the kind of the additional detail Dave said is that people in the government in the United States would like to see the U.S. get a piece of the manufacturing of these industries, and yet the world benefits when China deploys these technologies inexpensively. So how do you square that circle? What do these countries do? Who wants to jump in? Go ahead, Cynthia. Yeah.
Really interesting areas that are significant to both China and the U.S. One is obviously what Mark said about shale gas, that a lot of the technology and know-how can be transferred there, and globally that would make a difference. Another one is clean coal. Because I worked with the summit team, so I have some knowledge about that, and obviously that's another similarity between U.S. and China. Interestingly, I think there's not enough done, and I believe the DOE has a great relationship with the NDRC, the NEA, so that can be done. If I can just make one minor comment.
Yeah.
For example, GE has made a recent investment in one of the biggest transmission companies in China, China Xidian Group. It's a wholly owned state-owned enterprise, and the plan is for GE to have a strategic position within the Xidian board, and Xidian would, of course, legally transfer some technology from GE and also commission some of the manufacturing for GE for the global market. So that's a kind of an example for win-win.
So it says 0000 up here, but I'm going to just break the rules and let one more person ask a question. So who has a quick question? Okay, go ahead.
If the deal in San Antonio is so good, why is there DOE or taxpayer money in it? Why isn't it just totally financed by private equity or by investment? And the follow-up to that is, what's the percentage breakdown of DOE money versus the private equity money, and will there be a return back to the U.S. government, either in the form of manufacturing jobs like what's discussed or in some other tangible financial way?
Did everyone hear that? Raise your hand if you didn't hear the question. So the question is, we talked about this Texas deal, how much money is coming from the U.S. Department of Energy, how much money is coming from private investors, particularly Chinese private investors, and what will be the returns to American taxpayers? That's basically the question. Anyone want to jump in on this?
I'll do it very briefly.
Great.
Obviously, without the DOE grant, this is a massive scale project that has never been done before. It's sort of a first of its kind. So private equity investors tend to frown upon 8% returns, even though it's positive. So it was very necessary for the project to have some grant and also the ITCs, the investment tax credits, to get the project interesting to investors. And another factor was long-term. This is a long-term project. It takes probably 4 years for the plant to be operational. So a lot of the investors will not be able to sustain that kind of construction risk. Therefore, it's difficult to get it financed. But in terms of returns to DOE, obviously, there's going to be a lot of jobs in San Antonio, both in the construction period and in the operational period, which would last like for 20 years at least. So that's, I guess, the primary motivation for DOE. Of course, if you can comment on that, I would really appreciate it. Yeah.
10 seconds, no? Okay.
Not under my purview.
Excellent, okay. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.